The December wind cut through Nebraska territory like a butcher's knife, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin raw. Martha Henley pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little against the cold that had already seeped into her bones. Her boots, worn thin at the soles, crunched through the frozen mud as she approached the ranch house, a low, sprawling structure that seemed to hunker down against the prairie wind like a wounded animal. She'd walked 8 miles from the stage stop, following directions given by a merchant who'd looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion reserved for widows with empty pockets. The Garrison Ranch. He'd said, might need help. Might. That single word had been enough to set her feet moving, even as doubt gnawed at her empty stomach. Martha paused at the edge of the yard, taking in the scene before her. The ranch showed signs of hard use, but good bones, sturdy log construction, a barn that stood straight despite the weather, fences that marched in orderly lines toward the horizon. But there was something else, too. Something in the way tumbleweeds had gathered against the porch steps, in the curtainless windows that stared blindly at the approaching dusk. This was a place where something vital had been lost. Her knock came out weaker than intended, barely audible above the wind. She raised her fist again, this time bringing it down with more force. The sound echoed hollow, like striking a coffin lid. Martha winced at the thought, pushing away memories of another door, another knock, another life that had ended 14 months ago when they'd brought James home from the cattle drive, his body broken by a horse's hooves. The door opened without warning, causing her to stumble back a step. The man who filled the doorway was everything her late husband hadn't been. Tall where James had been compact, dark where he'd been fair, hard-edged where James had worn easy smiles. This man's face looked carved from the same weathered wood as his house, all sharp angles and deep lines that spoke of too many seasons fighting the land. "We don't need nothing," he said, already moving to close the door. "Wait, please." The desperation in her voice surprised them both. Martha straightened her spine, trying to summon what dignity remained to her. "I heard you might need help. I can cook, clean, mend. I've worked cattle too, if needed." His eyes, gray as winter sky, traveled from her patched dress to her work-roughened hands, taking inventory of what stood before him. Martha held still under his scrutiny, though she wanted to shrink away. She knew what he saw. A woman of 32 who looked older, her blonde hair gone dull, her figure too thin from months of scraping by on pride and prayer. "Can't pay wages," he said flatly. "Barely keeping the ranch afloat as is. Room and board would suffice." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, revealing too much of her desperation. "Just through winter, I'll earn my keep." He studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not softness exactly, but a recognition perhaps, one wounded creature acknowledging another. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to a growl that seemed pulled from somewhere deep in his chest. "Only job here is wife in my bed." The words hung in the air between them like icicles, sharp and glittering with implications. Martha felt heat flood her face despite the cold, anger and humiliation warring in her chest. How dare he? She'd come here offering honest work, not... But then she looked, really looked, at his face. There was no leer there, no cruel amusement at her expense. His expression remained flat, matter of fact, as if he'd simply stated that the sky was gray or the ground was hard. This wasn't a proposition born of lust or meanness. This was something else entirely. "I'm not that kind of woman," she said, voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "Didn't say you were." He shifted his weight, and she caught a glimpse of the interior behind him. A kitchen table with 3 chairs, only one showing recent use. A child's wooden horse abandoned by the cold fireplace. "Got a boy needs raising? House needs tending. Man needs a wife for those things, not a hired girl who'll leave come spring." The brutal honesty of it struck her like a physical blow. Here was a man who'd stripped all pretense from need, laid it bare as bones in the desert. He wasn't offering romance or even kindness, just survival. Mutual and practical as a business contract. "Your wife?" she asked. though the answer was written in every line of neglect in the house behind him. Fever took her last spring. Boy hasn't spoken since. Martha's heart clenched involuntarily. A motherless child, silent in grief. She knew that silence, had lived in it herself those first weeks after James died, when words seemed too heavy for her tongue to form. "That's not a marriage," she said. "That's an arrangement. Marriage is an arrangement." His laugh held no humor. "Folks just dress it up prettier most times. I'm past pretty words. You need a home. I need a woman's hands in this house. Boy needs something I can't give him. That's the offer." She should walk away. Every proper instinct in her body screamed to turn around, to face that bitter wind again rather than step across this threshold. But propriety was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her last dollar had bought the stage ticket here. Her stomach had been empty for 2 days, and somewhere behind this hard man was a child drowning in silence. "I'd want to meet the boy first," she heard herself say. Something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe? Or respect? He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in from the cold, then. Won't solve anything freezing on my porch." Martha crossed the threshold, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The warmth inside was meager, just enough to remind her body how cold it had been. The main room stretched before her, combining kitchen and living space in the way of ranch houses built for function over form. Everything spoke of masculine neglect. Dishes stacked but not washed, floors swept but not scrubbed, furniture sturdy but graceless. "Coffee?" he asked, moving toward the stove with the automatic motions of a man who'd grown used to doing for himself. "Thank you." She removed her shawl, looking for somewhere to hang it, finally draping it over the back of a chair. "The boy?" "Ben. He's in his room." He poured coffee that looked thick as tar into 2 cups. "Spends most time there now." She accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The coffee was bitter enough to make her eyes water, but the heat of it spreading through her chest was worth the assault on her tongue. "My name is Martha," she said, realizing they'd negotiated terms without even exchanging names. "Martha Henley. Thomas Garrison." He didn't offer his hand, and she didn't expect it. "Tom, mostly." They stood in awkward silence. 2 strangers who just discussed sharing a bed with less emotion than most folks ordered dry goods. Martha tried to reconcile this reality with the dreams she'd once harbored as a young bride. Dreams of love eternal and hearts entwined. Those dreams lay buried with James now, as surely as his body lay beneath Nebraska soil. A movement in the doorway caught her eye. A small figure stood half hidden in shadow, and Martha's breath caught. The boy couldn't be more than 6, with his father's dark hair but finer features that must have come from his mother. His eyes, huge in his thin face, fixed on her with an intensity that seemed too old for his years. "Ben," Tom said, his voice gentling in a way that transformed his face briefly. "This is Mrs. Henley." The boy didn't respond, didn't move except to edge slightly further behind the doorframe, but his eyes never left Martha's face, studying her with the wariness of a wild creature deciding whether to bolt or stand its ground. Slowly, carefully, as she'd once approached orphaned calves on her husband's farm, Martha lowered herself to her knees, bringing herself to the boy's eye level. She didn't speak, didn't reach out, just waited with the patience born of understanding that grief made its own rules about time. Long moments passed. The wind rattled the windows. The stove popped and settled. And still the boy watched her, silent as stone but alive with a desperate kind of attention that spoke louder than words. Finally, Ben took a single step into the room. From behind his back, he produced a carved wooden horse, its paint worn away by countless small fingers. He held it out toward her, not giving it, just showing. Sharing something precious in the only way he could. Martha felt her heart crack, not from her own losses this time, but from the weight of this child's need. She looked at the toy with the seriousness it deserved, then met Ben's eyes again. "That's a fine horse," she said softly. "Does he have a name?" Ben's lips moved, though no sound came, but it was movement, effort, a reaching toward connection that hadn't been there moments before. He drew the horse back to his chest but remained in the room, a victory measured in feet and inches. "He don't talk," Tom said unnecessarily, his voice rough with something that might have been hope, "not for months now." Martha rose slowly, knees protesting the cold floor. When she looked at Tom, she saw he'd been watching her with his son, measuring her response, whatever test she'd just passed. It showed in the slight easing of tension around his mouth. "The offer stands," he said. "Marriage in name and duty, roof over your head, food in your belly, respect in my house. I won't promise love or soft words, but I won't raise a hand to you neither. And you'll have say in the household matters. The boy needs a mother's touch. I need—" He stopped, jaw working. "I need this house to be a home again." Through the window, Martha could see the last light dying on the horizon, painting the frozen prairie in shades of purple and gray. Out there lay only cold and uncertainty. In here stood a chance, not for happiness maybe, but for purpose, for survival, for a silent boy who'd shown her his horse. "I'll stay the night," she said, the words feeling like stepping off a cliff. "We'll see, come morning." Tom nodded, accepting her terms as readily as he'd stated his own, and Martha knew, with a certainty that settled like lead in her stomach, that come morning she'd still be here, not because she wanted this strange, harsh man or his loveless offer, but because sometimes the only choice wasn't between good and bad, but between bad and worse. The wind picked up outside, howling its loneliness to the darkening sky, but inside, for the first time in months, Martha wasn't facing it alone. Morning came like a reluctant visitor, gray light seeping through frost-covered windows. Martha woke disoriented on the narrow cot Tom had set up in what had once been a sewing room. Her bones ached from cold and the thin mattress, but she'd slept, truly slept, for the first time in weeks, exhaustion overcoming the strangeness of her circumstances. She found Tom already at the kitchen table, coffee steaming before him, studying a ledger with the grim concentration of a man reading bad news. He looked up at her entrance, nodded once, and returned to his figures. Martha poured her own coffee, noting the near-empty larder, the last heel of bread, the precious few eggs in the basket. "I meant what I said." His words came without preamble, eyes still on his ledger. "But I'll make it plainer. Since you stayed the night, this ranch is hanging by a thread. Lost half my herd to blackleg disease last summer, right after—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Right after Mary passed. What I'm offering ain't comfort. It's sharing the struggle." Martha sat across from him, studying his face in the morning light. The harshness remained, but she could see now it was worn like armor, protecting something that had been broken and hastily mended. "You could hire help for spring roundup," she said carefully. "When things improve, things don't improve." He closed the ledger with a snap. "They just get different kinds of hard. And hired help don't stay. They don't make a boy smile or remember to put flowers on a grave or know which drawer holds the good tablecloth." His laugh was bitter. Mary knew all that. House knew her touch. Now it's just walls and roof. "So, you want a replacement?" The words came out sharper than intended. "No." His response was immediate, fierce. "Can't replace Mary any more than you can replace whoever you're running from. But the living got to keep living, or else what was the point of any of it?" The brutal truth of it silenced her. Tom stood abruptly, chair scraping against wood floor. "I need a wife, Mrs. Henley. Not for comfort in the night. I can live cold. But that boy needs more than I can give. This house needs more. The ranch hands need to see stability. Neighbors need to know we're not failing." He moved to the window, looking out at his domain. "I'm offering partnership. You'd have equal say in household matters, respect of my name, protection of my land. In return, you'd be mother to my son, mistress of this house. Wife-in-law, if not in other ways." Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You're very plain speaking, Mr. Garrison." Found it saves time. He turned back to her. I won't court you with false promises. Won't pretend this is something it ain't, but I'll treat you fair, provide what I can, and never give you cause to fear me. That's more than some women get with flowers and poetry beforehand. She wanted to argue, to defend the memory of courtship, of love. But James had courted her with sweet words and sweeter kisses. And she'd still ended up here, desperate and alone. Perhaps Tom's honesty was its own kind of kindness. The boy, she said, Ben, you said he needs a mother. But what if he doesn't want one? What if he can't? She struggled for words. What if I can't reach him? For the first time since she'd met him. Tom's expression truly softened. You reached him last night. First time he's come out of his room for a stranger since Mary died. First time he's tried to communicate. Showing me his horse isn't accepting me as his mother. No, but it's a start. Tom returned to the table, sitting heavily. I won't lie to you. Boy might never speak again. Doc says there's nothing wrong with his voice, just his heart. Maybe a woman's presence helps. Maybe it don't, but I gotta try something. Ben appeared in the doorway then, still in his nightshirt, bare feet, silent on the cold floor. He looked between them with those two knowing eyes, sensing the weight of adult conversation. Without hesitation, he crossed to Martha's side of the table, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. Though he didn't touch her, Tom's intake of breath was audible. He ain't done that in months. Martha carefully didn't move, didn't want to spook the child, but she let her hand rest on the table where Ben could see it, palm up, available but not demanding. The boy studied her hand for a long moment, then placed his wooden horse on the table beside it. Not in her hand, but near it, an offering of proximity. Ben, Tom said quietly, Mrs. Henley might stay with us. Would you like that? The boy's eyes flicked to his father, then back to Martha. Slowly, deliberately. He nodded. Well, Tom cleared his throat roughly. That's settled then. Nothing's settled. Martha found her voice. You're asking me to bind my life to yours based on need and proximity, to mother a child who may never speak, to take on a failing ranch and a bitter man and call it marriage? Yes. He didn't flinch from her assessment. That's exactly what I'm asking. And if I say no, then you walk back to town in the cold, and we both continue as we were. He paused. But you won't say no? You're very sure of yourself. No, I'm sure of desperation, yours and mine. He leaned back in his chair. I saw it in your face yesterday. You're at the end of your rope, same as me. Difference is, I'm offering to splice our ropes together. Might hold, might not, but better chance than either of us has alone. Martha wanted to deny it, to claim she had options, dignity, choice. But Ben's silent presence beside her spoke louder than pride. Here was a child drowning in grief. And she knew, God help her, she knew what that felt like. Knew the weight of words that wouldn't come, the way silence could eat you from inside. If I agree, she said slowly, I have conditions. Tom gestured for her to continue. First, I'll need a proper bedroom. The sewing room's too cold for winter. You'd have the main bedroom. I'll take the sewing room. That stopped her short. But, said you'd be wife-in-law. Master bedroom goes with that. I can sleep anywhere. She absorbed this. Another unexpected facet of his proposal. Second, I'd need some say in the ranch operations. If I'm to be partner, not hired help, you'd have equal say in anything touching the household. Ranch books would be open to you. Major decisions we'd make together. Third, about Ben. She looked down at the boy, who was watching their negotiation with intense focus. I won't try to replace his mother. Won't force him to call me anything he's not comfortable with. He sets the pace. Fair enough. And if he never speaks? If I can't help him? Tom was quiet for a moment. Then we'll have tried. That's all anyone can do. Martha felt the last of her resistance crumbling. Not because his offer was good. It wasn't. Not because she wanted this. She didn't. But because sometimes life herded you into a corner and the only choice was which wall to put your back against. When? She asked. Circuit preacher comes through next week. Or we could ride to town, find Judge Harper. Next week. The words felt like stones in her mouth. Gives us time to adjust to the idea. Practical. Tom stood. I'll move my things today. You can settle the house how you see fit. Need anything from town? The sudden shift to mundane matters left her reeling. They'd just negotiated a marriage like a grain contract. And now he was asking about supplies. Fabric, she said faintly. If there's money for it, Ben needs new clothes, and the windows need curtains. Tom pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket, setting it on the table. What's there is yours for household needs. I'll be in the barn. He left without ceremony, taking his coffee and ledger. Martha sat in the sudden silence, aware of Ben still beside her, of the weight of the pouch on the table, of the magnitude of what she'd just agreed to. Well, she said to the boy, not really expecting response. I suppose we should have breakfast. Ben moved then, crossing to a low shelf and retrieving a wooden bowl. He set it carefully on the table, then looked at her expectantly. Eggs? She guessed. He shook his head. Porridge? Another shake. Flapjacks. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. He nodded. Flapjacks it is, though you'll have to show me where things are. What followed was a strange ballet of communication without words. Ben pointed, gestured, led her through the kitchen's mysteries. She found herself narrating their actions, filling the silence with gentle chatter that required no response. And slowly, incrementally, the boy relaxed in her presence. When Tom returned for the noon meal, he found them thus. Martha at the stove, Ben at the table drawing patterns in spilled flour, the kitchen warm with more than just heat from the fire. He stood in the doorway, watching, and Martha caught something unguarded in his expression, a hunger that had nothing to do with food. But when he entered, his face resumed its careful neutrality. Smells good, was all he said. But Ben looked up at his father and smiled. Small, tentative, but real. And Martha understood that whatever strange bargain she'd made, whatever loveless future she'd accepted, this moment made it worthwhile. A child's smile in a kitchen that had forgotten joy. She served the meal, simple fare, but hot and filling. They ate in companionable silence. Three souls learning the shape of each other. And if it wasn't love, it was perhaps the ground where love might someday grow. Or if not love, then at least peace. In that bitter winter of 1883, peace seemed precious enough. Outside, the wind continued its lonely howl. But inside, for the first time in months, the Garrison house felt almost like a home. The house revealed itself to Martha like a story written in dust and neglect. Each room held echoes of the woman who'd come before. Mary's neat stitching on pillowcases gone yellow with time. Her handwriting labeling preserves jars dated the previous summer. Her apron still hanging on a peg by the door, stiff with unuse. Martha moved through the spaces quietly, Ben trailing behind her like a shadow. The boy had attached himself to her side since breakfast, watching her every movement with those dark, serious eyes. When she reached for something on a high shelf, he'd point to a step stool. When she paused, uncertain where to find something, he'd lead her wordlessly to the right cupboard. The main room was large but cheerless. Furniture pushed against walls as if making space for dancing that no longer happened. A layer of grit covered everything. Not filth exactly, but the accumulation of months without deep cleaning. The windows were worst of all, so filmed with dust and smoke that the winter light struggled through like weak tea. "Shall we start here?" Martha asked Ben, who nodded solemnly. She heated water on the stove, found rags and lye soap, and set to work. Ben surprised her by fetching a small bucket, clearly wanting to help. She gave him the job of washing the lower window panes while she tackled the higher ones. They worked in companionable silence, broken only by the splash of water and squeak of cloth on glass. As the windows cleared, light flooded in, revealing both the room's good bones and its sadness. The furniture was quality work, hand-carved by someone who knew wood. But the curtains were gone, the rug rolled up in a corner, the walls bare where pictures had been removed. "Your mother liked things bright," Martha observed, noting the pale rectangles where frames had protected wallpaper from fading. Ben stopped washing, his small body going still. Martha cursed herself for mentioning Mary so directly, but then the boy moved to a chest in the corner, one she hadn't noticed. He struggled with the latch until she helped him, revealing contents that made her breath catch. Here was Mary Garrison, packed away but not discarded. Photographs in silver frames, needlework samplers, a set of blue china wrapped in newsprint, books with pressed flowers between their pages. Ben reached past all of it to pull out something from the very bottom, a quilt, wedding ring pattern in blues and whites. He held it up to Martha, and she read the question in his eyes. "You want to use it?" she asked gently. He nodded, then carried the quilt to the rocking chair by the fireplace, spreading it over the seat with careful hands. The splash of color transformed that corner, made it look lived in again. Ben stepped back to survey his work, then looked at Martha for approval. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. They continued their excavation of the chest together. Martha let Ben guide what came out and what stayed packed away. The photographs he wanted displayed, his mother young and smiling, his parents on their wedding day, a family portrait with baby Ben in Mary's arms, the china he wanted in the cupboard, but Mary's personal effects, her hairbrush, jewelry box, a half-finished letter, these he carefully returned to the chest, closing that part away. Tom appeared in the doorway as they were arranging photographs on the mantel. He stopped short, face unreadable, taking in the changes, the clean windows, the quilt, Mary's china visible through glass cupboard doors. "Boy wanted them out," Martha said quickly, feeling like she needed to defend their actions. Tom's eyes went to Ben, who stood very straight, chin lifted as if ready for rebuke. Father and son regarded each other across the bright room, and Martha held her breath. "House needed color," Tom said finally. "Looks better." Ben's shoulders relaxed, and he crossed to his father, taking his hand and leading him to see each change. Tom followed, listening to his son's silent tour, and Martha saw his throat work when Ben showed him Mary's photograph placed centrally on the mantel. "She was beautiful," Martha said softly. "Yes." The word came rough, inside and out. "Ben has her eyes." Tom looked at his son, really looked, as if seeing past his own grief for the first time in months. "He does. Same way of tilting his head when he's thinking, too." The moment stretched fragile between them until Ben tugged his father's hand, leading him to the kitchen where the noon meal waited. Martha followed, feeling like she'd passed some test she hadn't known she was taking. After Tom returned to his work, Martha and Ben continued their household resurrection. The boy showed her Mary's kitchen arrangement, which made more sense than Tom's haphazard system. He knew where the good tablecloth was stored, which dishes were for every day and which for company, where his mother had kept her recipe box. That recipe box nearly undid Martha. Mary's careful script covered card after card, not just ingredients, but notes. Tom's favorite, add extra molasses. Ben loves these with jam. Make when the melancholy comes, never fails to cheer. Here was a woman who'd known her family's needs down to their bones, who'd built small happinesses into everyday tasks. "Your mama knew how to make a home," Martha told Ben, who was watching her handle the cards with anxious eyes. "Would you like to help me make her molasses cookies? The ones your PA favors?" The boy's nod was eager. They spent the afternoon baking, Ben standing on a stool to reach the counter, following his mother's recipe like sacred text. He knew which wooden spoon she'd used, which bowl was right for mixing. When Martha pulled the first batch from the oven, the smell filled the kitchen with warmth and memory. Ben took a cookie, still almost too hot to handle, and bit into it. His eyes closed, and Martha saw tears slip down his cheeks, the first she'd seen him shed. She didn't speak, didn't move to comfort, understanding instinctively that this grief needed space. Instead, she took her own cookie and found Mary had been right. The extra molasses made all the difference. When Tom came in for supper, He stopped dead at the kitchen doorway. The table was set with Mary's good cloth, her china laid out properly, and in the center, a plate of molasses cookies that filled the air with Christmas despite the January cold. Ben helped, Martha said unnecessarily. He knew right where everything was. Tom's eyes found his son, who was already in his seat, looking uncertain despite his earlier enthusiasm. Slowly, Tom crossed to the table, picked up a cookie, took a bite. He chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, then spoke to his son, just like your mama made them. Ben's smile broke like sunrise. He reached for another cookie, then paused, looking at Martha. With careful deliberation, he selected the best cookie on the plate and held it out to her. The offering was clear: acceptance, gratitude, maybe even the beginning of trust. Martha took the cookie with the ceremony it deserved. Thank you, Ben. They ate their simple supper, beans and cornbread. Nothing fancy, but the room felt different, fuller. The clean windows let in the last of the day's light. The photographs watched benevolently from the mantel, and Mary's touches everywhere seemed blessing rather than haunting. After supper, Tom surprised her. Boy usually goes to bed right after eating. Might you read to him first? Mary always. He trailed off. Of course. Martha looked at Ben. Would you like that? Ben disappeared into his room, returning with a worn book, Aesop's Fables, pages soft with handling. He led her to the rocking chair with Mary's quilt, waited for her to sit, then curled up on the rag rug at her feet like a puppy. Martha read about clever crows and foolish foxes, her voice filling the quiet room. Tom stayed at the table, pretending to work on his ledger but really watching them. Ben's eyes grew heavy, his body relaxing by degrees, trust written in the looseness of his limbs. When the boy finally dozed off, Tom gathered him up with infinite gentleness. I'll put him to bed, he said quietly. Thank you for today, all of it. Alone, Martha sat in Mary Garrison's chair, wrapped in her quilt, surrounded by her things. She should feel like an interloper, she thought, should feel guilt at stepping into a dead woman's shoes. Instead, she felt something else entirely, purpose, not replacement but continuation, like picking up dropped stitches in knitting, continuing the pattern someone else had started. When Tom returned, he found her still there, studying the room they'd transformed. She would have liked you, he said suddenly. Mary would have appreciated what you did today. I didn't do it for her? No. He moved closer, firelight catching the planes of his weathered face. You did it for the boy. That's why she would have liked you. They stood in awkward proximity, two people about to bind their lives together out of necessity and loneliness and the needs of a silent child. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even friendship yet. But it was something. A foundation, maybe, on which other things might build. I'll need to go to town soon, Martha said, for fabric and supplies. I'll take you, day after tomorrow if weather holds. He paused. Folks will talk. Widow woman living here already. Let them talk. Martha surprised herself with the firmness of her voice. They'll talk different after the preacher comes. Tom studied her, and she saw approval in his eyes. You're stronger than you look. Had to be. She stood, folding Mary's quilt carefully. We do what we must. Yes, he agreed. We do. As Martha made her way to the bedroom, Mary's bedroom, her bedroom now, she felt the weight of the day settling into her bones. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations in this strange dance of practical partnership. But tonight, a silent boy slept peacefully. A lonely man had seen his house come alive again, and she had a purpose beyond mere survival. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but maybe, just maybe, it was the life she needed. The days fell into rhythm like the steady beat of a butter churn. Martha rose before dawn, stoking the fire that Tom had banked the night before, starting coffee thick enough to float horseshoes. By the time the men stirred, Tom from the narrow cot in the sewing room, Ben from his small bed, the kitchen would be warm and breakfast nearly ready. She learned the particular needs of this household through observation and error. Tom liked his eggs over easy, but would eat them anyway without complaint. Ben preferred his bacon crisp enough to crumble. Both of them had the rancher's habit of eating quickly, silently, as if meals were necessary interruptions to real work. But slowly, incrementally, breakfast became less utilitarian. Martha started baking bread in the evenings, so there'd be fresh slices for morning. She'd found Mary's preserves in the cellar, strawberry, plum, apple butter, and brought them up one jar at a time. Ben would catch her eye when she set out the strawberry, his favorite, and something near a smile would ghost across his face. The first week passed in careful navigation. Martha took over the household completely, freeing Tom to focus on the ranch work that winter made doubly hard. She watched from the window as he broke ice on water troughs, hauled hay to the feeding stations, repaired fences and barn doors with hands that split and bled in the cold. He never complained, but she saw him wince when he gripped his coffee cup, saw the stiff way he moved after long days fighting the wind. One evening, she gathered her courage and set a basin of warm water on the table after supper, along with salve she'd found in Mary's supplies. "For your hands," she said simply. Tom looked at the basin as if it might bite. "They're fine. They're bleeding. Been bleeding every winter for 15 years. Well, now they don't have to." They faced each other across the table, and Martha recognized this as a test to the partnership he'd proposed. She kept her expression mild, but didn't back down. After a long moment, Tom sat and placed his hands in the water, sucking in breath as warmth hit damaged skin. Martha worked the salve into the cuts and cracks with gentle efficiency. His hands were a map of hard labor, scars from wire, rope burns, calluses thick as leather, but they were capable hands, steady hands. Hands that had held his dying wife, that lifted his son with tenderness, that kept this ranch running against all odds. "Mary used to do this," he said quietly. "Should I stop?" "No." He cleared his throat. "No, it's needed." Ben watched from his usual place by the fire, the ever-present wooden horse in his lap. When Martha finished with Tom's hands, the boy rose and, to their surprise, brought another tin from the pantry. Different salve, smelling of peppermint. "Your mother made this?" Martha asked. Ben nodded, then pointed to his own small hands, miming rubbing. She'd put it on him when he helped with chores. Tom explained, said children's skin was too tender for ranch work without care. Martha held out her hand. "May I?" Ben placed the tin in her palm with grave ceremony. From that night forward, tending hands became an evening ritual. Tom's ravaged by work, Ben's small and precious, and eventually Martha's own, roughening from lye soap and cold water and the 1,000 tasks of keeping house. The second week brought the trip to town Tom had promised. Martha dressed in her best, which wasn't much, but clean and carefully mended. Ben insisted on coming. The first time he'd wanted to leave the ranch since his mother's death. Tom hitched the wagon in thoughtful silence. Town meant stares and whispers. Martha kept her chin high as Tom helped her down from the wagon in front of Henderson's dry goods. She knew what people saw. Tom Garrison with a woman who wasn't Mary. A boy who wouldn't speak. A situation that smelled of impropriety or desperation or both. "Mrs. Henley," Tom said formally, loud enough to carry. "Ben and I will see to the feed store while you tend to household needs. Meet you back here in an hour." The public acknowledgement of her name, her status as a respectable widow, not a kept woman, rippled through the watching crowd. Martha nodded regally. "That would be fine. Mr. Garrison, come along. Ben." To everyone's surprise, including Tom's, Ben took Martha's hand. The boy who hadn't voluntarily touched anyone since his mother's funeral placed his small fingers in Martha's work-rough palm and walked into the store with her, leaving his father standing on the boardwalk with something like hope on his face. Inside, Mrs. Henderson's curiosity battled with her merchant's instincts. Greed won. She bustled forward, all false warmth and calculating eyes. "Why, Mrs. Henley, was it? How lovely to see you in town. And young Benjamin, how you've grown. Shopping for the Garrison household. Are we? Yes. Martha didn't elaborate, moving purposefully toward the fabric bolts. I'll need sturdy cotton for work clothes, flannel for nightshirts, and something suitable for Sunday clothes for a growing boy. Ben stayed close, but his attention wandered to the candy jars on the counter. Martha saw his longing look and made a mental note. When she'd selected her fabrics, practical browns and blues for daily wear, a soft green that would bring out Ben's eyes for Sunday, she added thread, buttons, and needles to her pile. And 2 peppermint sticks, please, she said casually. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. Making yourself right at home out there, aren't you? Martha met her gaze steadily. Mr. Garrison has employed me as housekeeper. With particular care for Benjamin, I take my responsibilities seriously. Housekeeper. The word dripped skepticism. That what they're calling it now? That's what it is. Martha's voice could have frosted windows. Though I understand, Mr. Garrison and I will be married next week when the circuit preacher comes through. For propriety's sake and for Benjamin's stability, a boy needs a mother's presence. The truth, baldly stated, took the wind from gossip sails. What could be scandalous about a practical arrangement publicly acknowledged? Mrs. Henderson deflated slightly, then perked up at new fodder. Married. Well, rather sudden, isn't it? Poor Mary barely cold. 8 months cold. Martha cut her off. A child suffering in silence for 8 months. A good man trying to manage alone for 8 months. Yes, it's sudden. Life often is. She paid for her purchases with Tom's money, handed Ben his peppermint stick, and swept from the store with as much dignity as patched boots and worn gloves allowed. Ben sucked his candy thoughtfully, still holding her hand, and she felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. Let them talk, let them judge. This child needed her, and that was worth more than all the approval in the world. Tom was loading feed sacks when they emerged. He took in their joined hands, Ben's candy, Martha's high color, and drew his own conclusions. Trouble? Nothing worth mentioning. She helped Ben climb into the wagon bed. Though I've announced our wedding plans. Hope that wasn't premature. Circuit preacher's due Thursday. Tom lifted the last sack with a grunt. If that suits. Thursday's fine. They were halfway home before Tom spoke again. Ben doesn't usually take to people. He's a child. Children know when they're safe. You make him feel safe. Martha thought of the boy's hand in hers, the trust of that small gesture. We make each other feel safe, I think. Tom made a sound that might have been agreement and said no more. But that evening, she found a small wrapped package on her chair at dinner. Inside was a length of deep blue wool, fine enough for a wedding dress, or at least a good dress that happened to be worn to a wedding. For Thursday, Tom said gruffly, can't have my wife looking shabby. Sss, my wife. The words sent an unexpected shiver through her. Not unpleasant, but not entirely comfortable either. Martha fingered the beautiful fabric, calculating how quickly she could sew it up. Thank you. It's lovely. Mary picked it out. He admitted, last spring, for a dress she never got to make. Be ashamed to waste it. The gift took on new weight. Not just fabric, but trust. Mary's chosen cloth for Martha's wedding dress. The tangled sentiment of it should have felt wrong, but instead felt like blessing, like continuity, like the peculiar grace that sometimes emerged from grief. Ben reached across the table to touch the wool with reverent fingers, then looked at Martha and nodded approval. She'd learned to read his silent communications, the lift of eyebrow that meant more milk, the tilt of head that said, tired now, the rare, precious, almost smile that meant, yes, this is good. We'll make it together, she told him. You can help pin the pattern. And so they did. Over the next 3 days, Ben proved surprisingly helpful, holding fabric steady, handing her pins, even threading needles with his nimble fingers. Tom would find them in the evening, heads bent together over the sewing, and Martha caught him watching with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between sorrow and hope, loss and possibility. The dress came together under their joined efforts, simple but elegant, the blue bringing out the color in Martha's eyes that privation had faded. When she tried it on Wednesday evening, Ben clapped his hands, actually clapped, the first spontaneous joy she'd seen from him. "Do I look presentable?" she asked. Ben nodded enthusiastically, then ran to his room. He returned with something clutched in his small fist, a silver hair comb, delicate and lovely. "Oh, Ben, I couldn't—" But he pressed it into her hands with fierce insistence. Tom, watching from the doorway, cleared his throat. Mary would want it used. Beauty shouldn't be buried. Martha turned the comb in her hands, seeing how it would look tucked into her hair, understanding the gift was from both the living and the dead. "Then I'll wear it with honor." That night, her last as Martha Henley, she sat by the dying fire after the others had gone to bed. Tomorrow would change everything. Her name, her status, her future. She was trading the known grief of widowhood for the unknown challenge of a loveless marriage. And yet, was it loveless? Not passionate, certainly not romantic, but there was care in Tom's wounded hands accepting her ministrations, trust in Ben's fingers wrapped around hers, purpose in the small resurrections of a household returning to life. If not love, then what? Partnership? Family? Or simply the stubborn human insistence on building something from the rubble of what was lost? The fire settled with a soft crash of embers. Tomorrow the preacher would come. Tomorrow she would promise to honor and obey a man she barely knew. To mother a child who couldn't speak his need. To make a life from practical necessity and mutual loneliness. Tonight, she was still Martha Henley. Widow. Alone. Tomorrow, for better or worse, she would be Martha Garrison. Wife. February arrived with a blizzard that turned the world white and dangerous. Martha woke to howling wind and Tom already gone from the house. She found a note on the kitchen table. Checking cattle, stay inside. But by noon, with the storm worsening and Tom still absent, worry gnawed at her belly. Ben paced the windows, his agitation growing with each hour. When the boy brought her Tom's spare coat and pointed urgently at the door, Martha understood his fear. "He knows these storms," she told Ben, though her own voice lacked conviction. "He'll take shelter if needed." Ben shook his head violently, clutching the coat, his mouth opened and closed, fighting to form words that wouldn't come. The frustration in his eyes was painful to witness. By 3 o'clock, with daylight already fading in the storm, Martha made a decision. She bundled herself in every layer she could find, tied a rope around her waist, and secured the other end to the porch post. "You stay here," she told Ben firmly. "Watch from the window. If I'm not back in an hour, you ring that dinner bell until someone comes." The boy grabbed her arm, shaking his head, but Martha gently freed herself. "Your PA needs help, and I'm the only one here to give it. You're the man of the house while we're gone. Can you do that?" Ben's chin lifted, and he nodded, though tears tracked down his cheeks. Martha kissed his forehead, the first time she'd dared such intimacy, and plunged into the white chaos. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing breath and thought. She followed the rope fence toward the barn, calling Tom's name though the wind tore the words away. Her world shrank to the few feet visible ahead, the bite of ice on exposed skin, the fear that she'd made a fatal error. She found him by providence or luck, a dark shape against the snow near the feed shed. His horse stood over him, loyalty keeping the animal close despite the storm. Tom was conscious but barely, his left leg bent at an angle that made Martha's stomach lurch. "Fool woman," he growled when she knelt beside him. "Get back to the house. Not without you." She assessed quickly. The leg was broken, but he wasn't bleeding badly. The real danger was cold. Already his lips were blue, his words slurring. "Can you stand if I help? Leave me. Stop being noble. It doesn't suit you." Martha positioned herself under his arm, using strength she didn't know she possessed. "Ben's waiting. You want him to lose another parent?" That reached him. With her help and sheer determination, Tom managed to stand on his good leg. The journey back became a nightmare of small victories. 10 feet, then 20, following the fence line while the storm tried to tear them apart. Tom's weight grew heavier as cold and pain took their toll. More than once. Martha thought they'd both die there, frozen together like some tragic ballad. But anger kept her moving. Anger at Tom for risking himself, at the weather for its cruelty, at life for demanding so much. That anger burned hot enough to carry them both, step by agonizing step, until the house materialized from the white void like salvation. Ben flung the door open before they reached it, his small face wild with relief and terror. Together, they got Tom inside and onto the kitchen floor near the stove. His skin was gray, his breathing shallow, the broken leg swollen inside his boot. Need to set it, Tom managed through chattering teeth. You ever... No? Martha was already cutting the boot away with her sewing scissors. But I watched my husband set a ranch hand's arm once. Close enough. What followed was brutal necessity. Ben fetched wood for splints without being asked, held his father's shoulders while Martha positioned the leg. Tom bit down on a leather strap, sweat mingling with the snowmelt on his face. When Martha pulled the bone straight, his scream was mercifully brief before unconsciousness took him. She splinted the leg with shaking hands, then faced the challenge of moving him. Ben solved it by dragging his own mattress to the kitchen, creating a makeshift bed by the warmth. Together, they wrestled Tom onto it, piled him with every blanket in the house. Night fell with the storm still raging. Martha kept vigil, spooning warm broth between Tom's lips when he surfaced, keeping the fire fed, watching for fever or worse. Ben curled against his father's uninjured side, one small hand on Tom's chest as if to assure himself of each heartbeat. Near midnight, Tom's eyes opened fully, focused and aware. Still here, he said, voice rough. Where else would I be? Somewhere sensible. Married to a shopkeeper, maybe. Safe man with safe work. I was married to a safe man once. Martha wrung out a cloth in warm water, wiping his face with gentle strokes. Safety didn't keep him from dying. Tom caught her wrist, his grip weak but insistent. Why'd you come after me? Because that's what partners do. Partners. He seemed to taste the word. That what we are? Among other things. What other things? Martha looked at Ben, sleeping now with the boneless trust of childhood, then back at Tom's weathered face. Family, I suppose. Odd and patched together, but family. Tom's thumb moved against her wrist, the barest caress. Coulda died out there, but you didn't. Coulda let me, but I didn't. Why? The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Martha could have said duty, necessity, Christian charity. All would be true. But looking at this man who'd offered her shelter without tenderness, partnership without passion, she found a different truth. Because the thought of losing you was worse than the storm. Tom's eyes widened slightly. Then, with his free hand, he reached up and touched her cheek, barely a brush of fingertips. But the first voluntary tenderness he'd shown her. Martha, just her name, but weighted with something new. The storm raged 3 more days, trapping them in domestic closeness. Martha tended Tom with matter-of-fact care that couldn't quite hide growing affection. She'd seen him vulnerable now, heard him cry out in pain, watched him fight unconsciousness to reassure his son. The harsh man who'd proposed a business arrangement had other facets. Patience when Ben helped change his bandages. Quiet humor as cabin fever set in. Grudging gratitude that sat awkwardly on his shoulders. For his part, Tom watched Martha with new eyes. She moved through crisis with calm competence, never complaining about the extra work his injury created. But more than that, he saw how she was with Ben, natural, warm, protective. When the boy had nightmares about losing his father, too, Martha held him without hesitation, humming lullabies half-remembered from her own childhood. On the 3rd night, when Tom could finally sit up reliably, he called her to his makeshift bed after Ben had fallen asleep. Need to say something. Martha sat carefully on the mattress edge. You should rest. Been resting 3 days. Listen. He struggled for words, this man more comfortable with actions than speeches. What you did, coming after me, you'd have done the same. Maybe, but that's not... He stopped, frustrated. I offered you a cold arrangement. Roof and food for work and mothering. Didn't offer you a man worth saving in a blizzard.
Tom, let me finish. You could have let me freeze.
Taken the house, the ranch, everything. My will names you guardian of Ben and heir to the property. You knew that. Martha had known that, and the trust implicit in such arrangements staggered her. Tom continued doggedly. Instead, you risked everything to drag my worthless hide home. That's not hired help. That's not arrangement. That's what? She prompted when he stalled.
That's what a wife does. Real wife. Not the kind I offered you, but the kind you're choosing to be anyway.
Martha felt tears prick her eyes.
We're all choosing. Tom, you chose to trust me with your son. Ben chose to let me into his silence. I chose to stay. Maybe that's what family is. The choosing, over and over, especially when it's hard.
Tom covered her hand with his. I'm not good with pretty words. I don't need pretty words. What do you need? Martha considered, looking around the kitchen that had become command center. Sick room and sanctuary all at once. Time, patience. Maybe eventually something more than partnership, but less than passion. Something steady. Steady I can do. His mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Though you deserve better than steady. I've had passion. The words came quiet, but firm. It burned bright and left ashes. Maybe steady is exactly what I need. The wind chose that moment to finally quiet. The sudden silence almost startling after days of howling. In that hush, they could hear Ben's peaceful breathing, the settling of logs in the stove, the small sounds of a house sheltering its people. Storm's breaking, Tom observed. Yes, but neither moved to separate their hands, finding in that simple touch a promise of something that might, given time and choice and stubborn persistence, grow into its own kind of love. Not the wild romance of youth, but the deeper current that could carry two damaged people through whatever storms might come. Outside, stars began to appear between breaking clouds, and the temperature dropped toward the kind of cold that would freeze the world solid by morning. But inside, warmed by fire and proximity and the fragile beginning of understanding, the Garrison family, odd and patched together as they were, faced the breaking weather together. The buggy appeared on the horizon just as Martha finished hanging wash in the March wind. Tom, still favoring his healing leg, stood from his chair on the porch where he'd been mending harness leather. That'll be Catherine, he said, voice carefully neutral. Martha had known this day would come. Tom's sister lived in Denver, but family news traveled even across distance. A hasty marriage to a widow no one knew. Barely 2 weeks after meeting, of course it would draw scrutiny. Catherine Garrison Whitfield was everything Martha wasn't. Tall where Martha was average. Elegant where Martha was practical. Polished where Martha was work-worn. She stepped from the buggy in a traveling dress that probably cost more than Martha had seen in 2 years. Her expression already set in lines of disapproval. Thomas. She kissed her brother's cheek perfunctorily, then turned her assessment to Martha. And you must be the new Mrs. Garrison. Martha. She didn't offer her hand, sensing it wouldn't be taken. Welcome to the ranch. You must be tired from your journey. Not too tired to see what's what. Catherine's gaze swept the yard, the mended fences, the washing on the line. Where's Benjamin? At his lessons. Tom said, Martha's been teaching him. Has she? It wasn't a question. Catherine sailed past them into the house, and Martha caught Tom's apologetic glance before they followed. Inside. Catherine moved through the rooms like an inspector, noting every change. Her fingers trailed over Mary's china in the cupboard, straightened a photograph on the mantel, paused at the rocking chair with Mary's quilt. You've certainly made yourself at home, she observed. This is my home, Martha replied evenly. Is it? After, 2 months? Mary lived here for 8 years, built this life piece by piece, and now you sit in her chair, use her things, raise her child. Catherine. Tom's warning came sharp.
Someone needs to say it. Thomas, you barely mourned her before installing this replacement. The word hit like a slap. Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice level. I'm not trying to replace anyone. No? Then what do you call this? Catherine gestured at the room. Playing house with my brother, pretending to mother a child who isn't yours. I call it surviving. Martha's control finally cracked. I call it two people trying to build something from ruins. I call it a little boy who needed someone to care when grief stole his voice. Grief? Catherine laughed. Brittle as winter ice. You want to talk about grief? I held Mary's hand while she burned with fever. I promised her I'd look after them. And then I turned my back for a season and find Thomas married to the first woman who knocked on his door. That's enough. Tom's voice cut through like a blade. Martha saved my life this winter. She's brought warmth back to this house. Ben's starting to heal because of her. Ben doesn't need some stranger. He needs family. She is family, a small voice said from the doorway. Everyone froze. Ben stood there, fists clenched, face flushed with the effort of speaking. The words had come rusty, uncertain, but unmistakably his. Ben! Catherine reached for him, but he stepped back, moving closer to Martha. She stays, he managed. Each word a mountain climbed. My mama, now. Catherine's face went white. Benjamin, sweetheart, she's not. She stays. Louder this time, fierce with determination. Ben grabbed Martha's hand, holding it like a lifeline. Mine. The possessive claim of a child who'd lost too much already. Martha knelt beside him, not caring that Catherine watched, and pulled Ben into her arms. He burrowed against her, trembling with the effort of his declaration. It's all right, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. When she looked up, Catherine was crying, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe. The elegant woman suddenly looked lost, grief-stricken in her own way. He hasn't spoken since. Catherine's voice broke. Not even to me. And now he's choosing to heal. Tom said quietly. Can't you see that? Catherine sank into a chair, all fight draining away. She loved him so much, worried about him every moment, made me promise. She looked at Martha, really looked for the first time. I promised I'd make sure he was loved. He is, Martha said simply. They sat in awkward silence until Ben tugged Martha's sleeve. When she leaned down, he whispered, actually whispered, in her ear. Martha smiled despite the tension. Ben would like to show you something, she told Catherine. If you'd like. Curiosity won. Catherine followed as Ben led them to his room, where his arithmetic slate showed careful rows of numbers. His copybook displayed improving penmanship. But what he really wanted to show was on his windowsill, a small pot with green shoots poking through soil. Beans, he said carefully. For Mama's garden. Catherine touched the pot with shaking fingers. Mary always planted beans first, said they were reliable, like good friends. Ben told me, Martha said. Well, showed me, found her garden journal. You're helping him plant her garden. He's teaching me. I've never had much hand for growing things, but Ben knows all his mother's methods. Catherine watched Ben water his bean starts with a child's careful concentration. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, wounded, but not hostile. I loved her like my own sister. When she died, something in me broke too. And seeing someone else in her place, she paused. It hurts. I know, Martha said. I lost my husband. The first time I cooked in another woman's kitchen, using another woman's pots, I felt like a traitor to my own grief. But you stayed. For the same reason you came, because the living need us more than the dead do. Catherine studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. A laugh escaped Catherine, surprised, genuine. Mary would have liked that answer. She turned to Tom. She would have liked her, wouldn't she? Been glad someone practical was here, someone who'd work instead of weep. Mary was the most practical woman I knew. Tom agreed. Heart of a poet, but hands that could birth calves and break horses, and bake bread that could make angels weep, Catherine added. I don't suppose. I use her recipes, Martha said. Ben shows me which ones were favorites.
That evening, they sat around the table like a real family, extended, complicated, still raw in places, but family nonetheless. Ben spoke 3 more words during dinner, each one fought for and precious. Catherine told stories of Mary that made them laugh and ache in equal measure. Tom's hand found Martha's under the table, a brief squeeze of gratitude. After Catherine retired to the spare room, Martha found her standing before Mary's photograph on the mantel.
I owe you an apology, Catherine said without turning. I came here ready to war, to protect them from you. But you're not the enemy. You're just another widow trying to make sense of what's left. We all are, in our way, even Tom, widowed from the life he expected. Catherine faced her then. Take care of them, not because I ask, but because I think you already do. Ben choosing you, speaking for you, that's Mary's boy. She'd have defended what she loved just as fierce.
He's brave, like both his mothers. The phrase hung between them, acknowledgement of a complex truth. Ben had 2 mothers now, one in memory, one in flesh. Not replacement, but addition, like rooms added to a house to accommodate growing needs.
I'll visit more, Catherine said. If that's welcome. I've stayed away because it hurt too much, but Ben needs all the family he can gather. You're always welcome. You're his blood, his connection to Mary. I'd never want to sever that. Catherine embraced her then, sudden and awkward but sincere. You're a good woman. Martha Garrison, I think you'll do. Later, as Martha tucked Ben into bed, he caught her hand. Aunt Cat, stays? He asked, words still careful but coming easier. Whenever she wants to visit, she loves you very much. You stay. Always. Martha smoothed his dark hair. Always. That's what families do. Ben smiled. A real smile, not the ghost of one, and Martha felt her heart expand to make room for all of it. This child who wasn't hers but was, this house that held another woman's memory alongside her growing presence, this family stitched together from loss and necessity and the stubborn human refusal to quit. Through the window, she could see Tom by the barn, checking the animals one last time despite his healing leg. Catherine's acceptance had eased something in him. She'd seen it at dinner. Permission, perhaps, to move forward without feeling he was leaving Mary behind. They were all walking that line, honoring what was while building what could be. It wasn't easy or clean or simple, but as Ben's breathing deepened into sleep and the house settled into nighttime quiet, Martha thought it might be enough. This patchwork family, these careful bonds, this slow journey from grief toward something that might, someday, feel like joy. Tomorrow. Catherine would leave, but she'd return. Ben would speak a little more. Tom would work his ranch and slowly learn to lean on partnership. And Martha would tend this household that was becoming hers, not by replacing what came before, but by adding her own thread to the weaving. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was the life they were choosing, one careful day at a time. The cottonwood tree stood ancient and solitary on the rise overlooking the ranch, its massive trunk scarred by decades of prairie weather. Martha had discovered it on one of her walks with Ben, the boy showing her his mother's favorite spots. Now, on an April morning that held the first real warmth of spring, she stood beneath its budding branches in her blue dress while Tom shifted nervously beside her. "Don't see why we need another ceremony," he'd grumbled that morning. "Already married legal." But Martha had seen the truth in his freshly shaved face, his carefully mended best shirt, the way he'd polished his boots to a shine. The winter ceremony had been necessity. This was choice. Reverend Morrison had arrived the previous evening, a young minister new to the circuit, eager to practice his calling. He stood before them now with his worn Bible, smiling at the small gathering, just the 3 of them and 2 ranch hands as witnesses. "Dearly beloved," he began, then paused. "Though I suppose beloved applies mainly to young Benjamin here." Ben grinned. He did that now, smiled and even laughed occasionally. He stood between them.
holding the rings they'd fashioned from horseshoe nails in Tom's forge, his small face serious with the responsibility. "Thomas, Martha, you come before God not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as partners proven by trial. The winter past has tested you. This spring finds you choosing each other not from desperation but from knowledge." Martha glanced at Tom, finding him already watching her. His gray eyes held something new these days, a warmth that had nothing to do with the changing season. "Martha," the Reverend continued, "do you take this man as your husband, to stand beside him in drought and plenty, in sickness and health, in silence and speech?" The last addition made Ben giggle softly. He was talking more each day, still careful with words but no longer imprisoned by silence. "I do," Martha said, meaning it differently than she had in January. Then it had been surrender to circumstance. Now it was embrace of possibility. "Thomas, do you take this woman as your wife? To honor her partnership, trust her judgment, and build with her a family from the foundation already laid?" "I do." Tom's voice came rough but certain. "The rings?" Ben stepped forward proudly, offering up their handiwork. They weren't pretty, black iron beaten into circles, still showing hammer marks. But Tom had made them with his own hands while Martha held the metal steady, Ben working the bellows, created together, like everything else in their new life. Tom took her ring, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "With this ring, I thee wed. Again. Proper this time." A laugh escaped Martha as he slipped the rough band onto her finger. It shouldn't have been romantic, this practical man with his amended vows, this improvised ceremony under a tree. But her heart caught anyway. She took his ring in turn. "With this ring, I thee wed. For real this time, for always. By the power vested in me by God in the Nebraska Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Tom, you may—" But Ben interrupted, tugging at Tom's sleeve. "Papa," he said, the words still new enough to make Tom's breath catch. "Mama's ring, the other one." From his pocket, Ben produced a small gold band, delicate, worn, unmistakably Mary's wedding ring. Martha's stomach dropped. Surely Tom wouldn't— "Ben's idea," Tom said quietly. Reading her face, he asked, "Well, he wrote it out, actually. Showed me yesterday. He wants—" Tom struggled, then simply handed her the paper from Ben's careful hand. "Mama Martha should have Mama Mary's ring too, so she has both families." Martha's vision blurred. She knelt in her good dress, uncaring of grass stains, and faced Ben eye to eye. "Are you sure this was your mother's special ring?" Ben nodded firmly. She would share. She always shared good things. With reverent hands, Martha let Ben slip Mary's ring onto her right hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting. "Well," Reverend Morrison cleared his throat, clearly moved. "I've never seen that in any ceremony manual, but I'd say God's smiling on it. You may kiss your bride, Tom." Tom looked suddenly uncertain, and Martha realized they'd never kissed, not once in their months of marriage. "Touched hands. Yes, sat close by the fire. Yes, but this—" He cupped her face in his work-rough hands, thumbs gentle on her cheeks. "Martha," he said, just her name, but weighted with gratitude, respect, and something that might be the beginning of love. The kiss was brief, chaste, but real. Not passionate, but promising. When they pulled apart, Ben whooped and the ranch hands applauded, and Martha felt herself blushing like a girl. "Now then," Reverend Morrison said, "I believe there's mention of a celebration meal." They walked back to the house together, Ben between them, chattering about the cake Martha had made and the special dinner planned. The boy's recovery had accelerated since Catherine's visit, words tumbling out faster each day, as if making up for lost time. The meal was simple but festive. Martha had used precious sugar for the cake, and Tom had brought out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving. Even the ranch hands stayed, sharing stories and toasting the new couple with rough good humor. As evening fell and guests departed, Martha found herself alone with Tom on the porch while Ben fed his rabbits, another recent addition to their growing menagerie. "Thank you," she said,
For today. For making it more than just words. Figured you deserved something better than a business arrangement. Tom stared out at his land, their land. You've given us so much. Martha, Ben speaking again, the house warm, He stopped, searching for words. The feeling like we might make it after all. We are making it. Yes. He turned to her then. But I meant what I said before. You deserve more than steady, more than partnership. Martha considered this man she'd married, first from desperation, now from choice. Still rough-edged, still careful with emotions, but trying. The tenderness he showed Ben, the respect he gave her opinions, the way he'd begun to smile when he thought she wasn't looking. Tom, she said carefully, are you courting me? A flush crept up his neck. Man should court his wife, even if he's backwards about it. We've done everything backwards. Maybe that's our way. Marriage first, courtship after, getting to know each other while building instead of promising. Martha thought of conventional courtship, flowers and pretty words and Sunday rides. All surface things that told you nothing about how a man would weather crisis or share burdens. She knew Tom's character now, had seen him at his worst, and watched him choose to be better. I accept your courtship. Mr. Garrison, she said formally, then spoiled it with a smile. Though I warn you, I'm already fairly attached to you. That's so. You're reliable, good with your hands, make strong coffee. Romance is dead, Tom said dryly. But he was smiling too. Ben came running back. Rabbits fed and sunset painting the sky orange behind him. Papa, Mama, come see, the beans are sprouting. They followed him to the garden plot they'd prepared together, where neat rows showed green shoots pushing through dark soil. Mary's garden, reborn. Ben's healing made visible in new growth. We'll have enough to can come summer, Martha said. Maybe even some to sell. Catherine will visit for harvest. Tom added, she'd like to help. They stood together in the fading light, a family assembled from pieces, stronger for having been broken and mended. Ben picked up a stick, drawing plans in the dirt for where the tomatoes would go, the squash, the flowers his first mama had loved. Here, he said, marking a special spot. Sunflowers. Mama Mary always put them here. They'll grow taller than me. Taller than all of us. Martha agreed. We'll have to stake them against the wind. I'll help, Ben said earnestly. I'm good at helping. Tom ruffled his son's hair. Best helper in Nebraska territory. As darkness drove them inside, Martha felt the weight of Mary's ring on her right hand, Tom's iron band on her left. 2 marriages, 2 promises, 2 kinds of love, not competing but completing, like 2 streams joining to make a stronger river. That night, after Ben was asleep, Tom caught her hand as she passed his chair. Stay a minute. She sat on the arm of his chair, a closeness still new enough to feel daring. Tom traced the rings on her fingers, his touch thoughtful. Do you miss him? Your first husband? The question surprised her with its directness. Sometimes, less now, I miss who I was with him, young, untested, believing life was simpler than it is. She considered. Do you miss Mary? Every day, but different now. Like missing summer and winter, sad but natural. Not the sharp thing it was. Ben helped me understand something. Martha said, love isn't diminished by addition. His heart holds both mothers without conflict. Maybe ours can too. Tom lifted her hand, kissed the knuckle above Mary's ring. Wise boy. Gets it from his mothers. Both of them. They sat quietly as the house settled around them, spring peepers singing through the open window. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Ranch work, teaching Ben, the endless round of daily tasks. But tonight, they were simply Tom and Martha Garrison, married twice, partnered in all things, learning the shape of a love neither had expected. Bed? Tom asked eventually. And for the first time, the question held possibility beyond sleep. Bed, Martha agreed, and hand in hand, they climbed the stairs toward whatever came next, ring-bound and hopeful in the tender spring dark. Spring settled over the Nebraska prairie like a blessing after the harsh winter. Martha stood in Mary's garden, her garden now,
watching Ben carefully thin the bean plants. His small hands moved with practiced care, just as his mother had taught him before she died. "Not too many," he instructed Tom, who was helping with the heavier work. "Mama said crowded plants make bitter beans. Your mama knew her business." Tom agreed, following his son's direction without complaint. Martha smiled at the sight. 6 months ago, Tom would have done this work alone, silent and grim. Now he worked alongside Ben, accepting guidance from a 7-year-old with patient grace. The change in both of them still caught her off guard sometimes. "Martha," Ben called. "Come see, the potatoes are flowering." She crossed to where he pointed proudly at the white blossoms. "Those'll be ready by July. We'll have new potatoes with cream and chives for Independence Day." "Can Aunt Cat come for Independence Day?" Ben asked. "Already invited," Tom said. "She's bringing her husband this time. Wants to show him the ranch." They worked through the morning, 3 figures moving in easy rhythm. Ben chatted steadily now, his words punctuated by comfortable silences rather than imprisoned by them. He told them about the book Martha was teaching him to read, about the new calf in the barn, about dreams where both his mothers sat together on clouds, watching him. "They're friends up there," he said matter-of-factly. "Mama Mary told Mama Martha thank you for taking care of us." Martha's throat tightened, but she only said, "That's a good dream, Ben." At noon, they retreated to the shade of the porch for lunch. Simple fare: bread, cheese, early lettuce from the garden, cold buttermilk from the spring house. Tom's hand found Martha's as they ate, an absent gesture that had become habit. Ben noticed and grinned. "You two are sweet now," he observed. "Like the Hendersons, always holding hands." "Mind your business, young man," Tom said, but he didn't let go. After lunch, while Ben napped, Martha and Tom walked the property line. It was their Sunday tradition, even on weekdays when work allowed, checking fences, planning improvements, dreaming about the future. "Could add another field next year," Tom said, pointing to a flat stretch. "If prices hold, might even afford hired help for harvest." "Ben wants chickens," Martha added. "Says his mama promised him chickens when he turned 7. Then chickens he'll have." Tom squeezed her hand. "Whatever you two want, if I can manage it." They paused at the rise overlooking their domain. The ranch spread before them, not wealthy, not easy, but theirs. Smoke rose from the chimney. Washing flapped on the line. Cattle grazed in peaceful clusters. "Home. Never thought I'd have this again," Tom said quietly. "After Mary died, thought Joy was done for me. Figured I'd work until I couldn't, raise Ben best I could. Endure." He turned to face her. "You changed that. Changed us. We changed each other," Martha corrected. "I was just as lost. Tom, just as convinced happiness was behind me. And now," she considered, looking at this man who'd become so dear. Still weathered, still careful with words, but his eyes held warmth now that transformed his harsh features. "Now I think happiness isn't behind or ahead. It's right here, in the choosing each day." Tom kissed her then, there on the hill in broad daylight, thorough and sure. When they pulled apart, Martha was breathless. "Come on, Mrs. Garrison," he said with a rare grin. "Let's go home." They returned to find Ben awake and entertaining a visitor. Old Sam Collins from the neighboring ranch sat on the porch, Ben showing him the wooden horse that had been his constant companion. "Afternoon. Tom, ma'am," Sam touched his hat. "Came by to see if you could spare some hands for my branding next week. I'll return the favor come your time." "Of course," Tom agreed. "How many you need?" As the men talked business, Ben tugged Martha inside. "I made something," he whispered, producing a folded paper from his pocket. Martha opened it carefully. In Ben's improving script were words that made her eyes blur. "My Family" by Benjamin Garrison. "I have Papa who is strong and good. I have Mama Martha who is kind and texts me. I had Mama Mary who loved me first. We are a family of 3 and 4. The end." "Oh, Ben." Martha hugged him tight.
This is wonderful. May I keep it? He nodded against her shoulder. Made it for you, for Mother's Day. Mother's Day. She'd forgotten it was coming. Her first as a mother, in all the ways that mattered. Can we put flowers on Mama Mary's grave for Mother's Day? Ben asked. Both of us? Together? Of course we can. We'll pick the best wildflowers we can find. Tom appeared in the doorway. Sam's gone. Everything all right? Ben showed his father the paper. Tom read it slowly, his expression softening with each line. That's fine work, son. Real fine. He looked at Martha over Ben's head. 2 lucky mothers you've got. That evening, they sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Ben played with his rabbits in the yard, his laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Tom's arm settled around Martha's shoulders, natural as breathing. Never thought I'd sit here again feeling content, Tom mused. Thought this porch would always feel empty. It's full now, Martha said. Different full, but full. That it is. They watched Ben chase fireflies as they began to blink in the gathering dusk, his delight infectious. The boy who'd stood silent and withdrawn 6 months ago now shouted with glee, calling for them to see each captured light. We did good, didn't we? Tom said, taking a chance on each other. Best bargain I ever made, Martha replied. Even if you did growl at me that first day. Growled 'cause I was scared, Tom admitted. Scared of hoping again. And now? Now I'm scared of different things, like how much I need you both, like how empty this place would be if you left. Martha turned in his arms. Tom Garrison, are you going soft on me? Maybe. He kissed her forehead. That a problem? Not at all. I like you soft, though you're rather appealing growly too. Ben ran up then, hands cupped around a firefly. Look, it's the brightest one. They admired his capture before he released it, watching the small light rejoin its fellows in the deepening night. Ben settled between them on the porch step, dirty and tired and perfectly happy. Can we do this every night? He asked. All summer? Just like this? Every night you want, Tom promised. Even when I'm big? Even then. Ben sighed contentedly, leaning against Martha's knee. Good. I like our family. Me too, Martha said softly. Me 3, Tom added, making Ben giggle. As full dark settled over the prairie, they remained on the porch, reluctant to break the spell. Ben dozed against Martha, trusting as a puppy. Tom's hand found hers in the darkness, their rings clicking softly together, his iron, her gold, promises kept and renewed daily. Tomorrow would bring its own work and worries, the garden to tend, the ranch to run, Ben to raise, a life to build from the pieces they'd gathered. But tonight, in the soft spring evening, they were complete, a family stitched from loss and found in the choosing, over and over, to stay. Martha thought of that desperate December day when she'd knocked on Tom's door, how the future had seemed nothing but cold and uncertain, now, surrounded by warmth and belonging. She could barely recognize that frightened widow. Tom had been right. They'd spliced their ropes together, and the bond had held stronger than either alone. In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. Ben stirred but didn't wake, safe in the circle of their protection. Tom began to hum, low and tuneless but soothing. Martha joined him, and their quiet music joined the night sounds, crickets and wind and the creak of the old house settling into sleep. This was happiness, Martha thought. Not the wild joy of youth or the desperate passion of new love, but this quiet contentment, this porch, this man, this boy, this life built from practical choices that had grown into something deeper than romance, something that could weather whatever storms might come, rooted deep as the old cottonwood on the hill. Time for bed, Tom finally said, but no one moved. 5 more minutes, Ben mumbled, still mostly asleep. 5 more minutes, Martha agreed. And so they sat, counting their riches in heartbeats and held hands, in sleeping children and shared silence, a family at the edge of the vast prairie, small against the enormity of land and sky, but together,
choosing each other with every breath, every dawn, every difficult and beautiful day. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in that vastness, perhaps Mary Garrison looked down and smiled, seeing her boys loved and loving, her house a home again. The circle unbroken, just wider than before. "Thank you," Martha whispered to the night, to the memory, to the strange turnings that had brought them all here. The prairie wind carried her words away, but the gratitude remained, solid as the earth beneath their feet, sure as the sunrise that would find them, come morning, still together. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what touched your heart in Tom and Martha's journey.